All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us today. Myself and Dr. Anthony Kopp of Kalamazoo Chiropractic and Rehabilitation will be hosting a mini webinar of sorts. So, in preparation for our January 13th, workshop on 5 pillars of running injury prevention and performance, we just wanted to jump on here, cover some of the key concepts that we'll be elaborating on within the workshop. So hopefully, again, you get some value from the webinar today. You also see some of the things we'll be talking about in the workshop, so you can join us live and really expand on those things. So if you're interested in joining us for the workshop, there is a barcode here on the left side of the screen, or you can go to garrettmclaughlin.com to sign up for that. That will be January 13th, which is a Saturday at 11:30 a.m. So to get us started, Anthony, what are the most common problems you see if we talk about hip mobility specifically as it relates to the runner? What are the most common problems you see with poor hip mobility?
Uh, Typically, what comes into the office is low back pain, knee pain, patellar pain, that kind of stuff. Going through an assessment, most people tend to lack hip mobility as runners, whether it's due to life or previous injuries, that kind of stuff. The one that I really focus on is hip extension. So the ability to actually bring the leg behind you. The common compensations that I usually see is either hyperextension through the back, which we'll talk about in the workshop, but rib cage is flared, pelvis is kind of dumped forward, lots of back tension. The other one I see is excessive knee flexion. So the knees stay bent, they never reach full extension to reach that stride as they're running.
Love it. So correct me if I'm wrong here. If you're seeing poor hip mobility, you might not even know it's poor hip mobility, right? You might have back pain, you might have knee pain. It's almost like where the issue is, it may not actually be the problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's the victim, not the robber.
Mhm.
So the police will should never go after the victim. Pain is the victim. They should always go after the culprit of that incident. So that's my goal, is to figure out what's actually driving the pain, not so much of let's just rub your knee and make it feel better, because you'll feel good for a little bit, but it'll probably come back as soon as you go run again, hit 3 miles, 5 miles, whatever training you're doing.
Yeah, I like that. So next question here, why do we lose hip mobility? What are some of the reasons behind it? You kind of mentioned or alluded to some of those in that first slide, but what do we need to look out for? What's the reason behind this?
Yeah. So just talked about pelvis positioning, rib cage positioning. Your breathing is really the number one thing that you should be focusing on. So in order to have good breathing patterns, the pelvis and the rib cage should be parallel to each other, not in this kind of open scissor position. Can't really see my hands. Open scissor position. So that open scissor position is going to put you into more hypertonicity, tightness through your back, your low back. So when people say they go for a run, they hit 3 miles, and it's, oh, my back just tightens up on me. That's a kind of a warning flag for me, saying, okay, your breathing as you start fatiguing is not great. So you turn on your back to hold you up, and now you're breathing with your back and chest every single time.
Mhm.
So rib cage, pelvis positioning are really the two things that everyone should focus on, no matter what. Doesn't matter what sport, what lifestyle activity you're going through, but you start with that, and it usually starts clearing things up. Every once in a while, you got to start digging a little bit deeper. Um, Lack of use, lifestyle habits, and then even into shoes and foot function. We're talking about lower body stuff in this workshop, so I'm going to stick with that. Yes, there's a bunch of upper body, um, shoulder, neck, hearing, eyesight, doesn't matter, whatever system it is. But since we're staying lower body, we're going to stick there. Foot function, the glute and the arch work together. So if you got a poor working arch, you got a poor working glute. If you got a bad glute, you're gonna have a bad arch. So everything kind of works together. You got to make sure that's maintained. Lack of use. If you don't use it, you lose it. Terrible saying. I hate it because it's overused, but it's kind of true. So you have to maintain these ranges of motion throughout your entire life. It's harder to get them back than it is to keep them.
Mhm. That's good. And then if you're someone that's lacking hip mobility and that's one of your goals to improve hip extension specifically and overall hip mobility, what are some of the things you can do to improve in this area?
Yeah. So first thing you can do is just kind of test yourself. If you don't know, you don't know. So find a few tests online. We're going to go over a few in this workshop, but see if your hips need work. The best way to do it and the fastest way to do it is get assessed by a professional massage, chiropractor, PT, strength coach, someone that you know does a good job. Get assessed, make sure that that's the right area to go after. I don't want you spinning your wheels, trying something and it never works, because that's kind of what I did for years and until I actually went and got assessed. Again, start with addressing ribcage and pelvis positioning. Make sure that's all set before you start stretching and strengthening different areas of the hip. Get fit for a good pair of shoes, one that feels good. You can feel your heel, arch, and big toe making contact with the inside of the shoe or the ground every single step. And they should always be comfortable from the start. You should never have to break a pair of shoes in. And then making sure to keep everything the way it is. Strength training, a mobility program of some sort, something that you know you're going to do every day, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes, just to maintain what you've built working with that professional or built on your own.
Awesome.
So Garrett, your turn. You're in the strength conditioning realm. When we talk a lot about training efficiency, training volume. What are the typical errors that you see that increases the risk of injury or plays into injury with runners?
Yeah, so the training errors has been one piece that I've been over the years, I think, looking at everything from biomechanics and human body lens, but neglecting a little bit of the training plan itself. So as I started to dig in some of the research, started seeing that 50 to 60% of running related injuries were due to training errors. So if we're either increasing some of these variables too quickly over time, looking at frequency first, how many days per week you are running. So if you go from 2 days per week and all of a sudden the next week you run 5 days per week, that big jump in number of days per week could be predisposing you to injury. Duration just looks at the number of miles or the volume you're running. So there really is no gold standard in terms of increase a training program at the training plan at this rate over time. It's really based on the person. But if you start making big jumps, you're sick, you take a week completely off from running, you just plug back in and increase mileage quickly. That is something that could also increase your risk of injury. And then intensity is a big one that I see from a lot of runners. So if we look at intensity, we think about how fast you're running, right? Easy running versus speed work, and then also hills and different types of terrain. If we're changing intensity too rapidly, we're going from all easy conversational running to then all speed work, or if we're running all of our easy runs too fast, or changing the surface abruptly. If we're used to training out on the road and all of a sudden we start running on some rugged trails, those are things which could increase our risk of injury. So I always recommend with all runners, look at your training plan first and foremost. Make sure it's systematic. It gradually, progressively overloads the body over time. So not making huge increases in any of these variables, and obviously trying to mix in your drop and recovery weeks within there to make sure you are actually recovering from your training as well.
So quick question on this. Picking a way to increase, which one would you choose first?
I always start frequency first. I always start, I guess, if this is technically the order here from the top down, but I look at frequency of laying that foundation. Can we run, again, if we think of omitting speed work, low mileage, start to run more days per week, and then we layer more miles on top of that, and then we add more intensity into the peak. If we think of kind of a triangle or pyramid, that's usually the most reliable that I find. The problem is it takes the most patience and it's the most boring way to train. But in reality, it creates a nice foundation then to put more running miles and more intensity on top of, where you usually experience less setbacks over time.
When it comes to running, trying to be as specific as possible, what's the most valuable exercises? Which ones do you recommend the most?
Mm-hmm. So for this is always a hard one, I think, and you could probably relate because it really depends on the person, how they present as you perform that assessment, talk about their goals, injury history, time until race day, all of those factors. So we really need to take into consideration the individual person first. But fortunately, there's been so much research conducted over the years that tells us these are the stresses and the demands that are placed on runners on a regular basis. So we can use those and directly pull from the research to know which areas we want to target. The biggest areas, I know we're going to focus so much on the hips specifically within the seminar, but the quad and that thigh region, and then also the soleus and the calf are the again, two areas of the body that we're placing the most stress upon while running. So some of the exercises that I like, and I could probably show you here quickly just to give people a sense, even though you probably have heard of these before. But first one, if we look at a split squat or rear foot elevated split squat. So if we have some type of chair, box, step, something behind us, we elevate that back foot and shifting the majority of the load onto this front leg, into the quad and the thigh, and then we just work on our rear foot elevated split squat in that manner there. Obviously something that's not moving in the back, that would be a key one because it really loads up that quad and thigh to build strength, especially as we land and strike the ground. That's how we absorb force through the leg. Second one is the tiptoe walking. So very simple one, and I like it because it ties in different things. Sorry, I'm cut off here, but it's not enough space in this room. But elevating the heels, keeping the knees slightly bent helps us engage that soleus muscle deep inside the calf. And then as we go from one step to the next, and you talked a little bit in some of the previous slides about getting that foot and hip and all those areas to work together. So as I transfer from one step to the next, I have to really reinforce good single leg stability and control, trying to connect that foot and hip together to get the soleus and then that entire kind of single leg stabilization linked together. Next one is the single leg side bridge. I'm sorry, perfect, worst timing for the dog to come out and get in the way. So next one, single leg side bridge. So on this exercise, if you're in a sideline position, it really loads up the lateral hip, teaches how to drive through the hip, to really drive hip extension as well, which is an important piece for running. So side bridge position here, going to drive the hips up and forward. So we're getting that hip abductor, we're getting that glute, we're getting that oblique and core stabilizers there to control us and stabilize the trunk. And then moving through. So this is kind of I would call it a diagonal motion here, hips up and forward, sitting slowly back and down to really tie the core, the hip, and some of those muscles together. Those are probably my top three that I work to get most runners to complete proficiently, and then obviously a lot of different variations and things, progressions and regressions off of that to fit the individual person.
Nice. So everyone wants to know what's going to help them run faster. What do you have for them?
Yeah, so the running speed piece, I think, takes a couple different elements. First and foremost, we need to follow and execute a good running plan to make sure, and if we're strong, if we're powerful, we possess that, but we're not running in the right manner. We're not allowing that to translate into running to actually see some good results there. So I think from a strength training component, heavy strength training, which runners are a little bit more resistant to do. So we want to lift heavier weights, even dropping down lower repetitions, heavy resistance to really build pure strength. And then layering in some type of plyometrics, some quick explosive movements that get us to create power and force and to explode and push away from the ground. So if we can create those things within the gym and then put them into play with different types of speed work, your hill repeats, track workouts, strides, we can really merge both of these worlds together to see some really good results. So a couple of my favorite exercises, and these are just simple. Again, we can do basic plyometrics, we could do Olympic lifting, we can do heavy strength training with different kettlebells, dumbbells, barbells, what have you. But these are very simple plyometrics that I find that can be helpful to people with no equipment needed. First one's a squat jump. So if we think about just traditional squat here, lowering down on these only halfway into the squat, just so I can quickly get off the ground. And we're trying to make that nice, quick, and repetitive as I get off the ground to create that power. I don't want to come down and be really slow. I want to make myself almost a spring so I can explode and create power as quickly as possible. Next one would be a bound. Now we're moving more horizontally, which is more specific to running. So if I sit back, a little hinge at the hips here, drive and push away, and try to create as much power as possible so I can cover a large distance from point A to point B. That'd be my second one. And then third one, single leg repetitive jumps. Now I think getting more specific to running being a very single leg sport, we need to become as efficient as possible on a single leg. So trying to run through a series of single leg jumps there to really control that landing, but quickly get off and create power back into the air.
Nice. So we'll cover this in the workshop, but for people that can't make it, what's the best way to start plyometrics for someone that's never done it before?
Mm-hmm. I usually start simple. Like I start with, I think creating a foundation with good strength exercises first before we start going to more explosive stuff is definitely recommended. So doing your squats, doing your Romanian deadlift, doing a regular deadlift, some other things that will calf raises, lay the foundation for these movements. And then over time, you can see kind of this progression that I went through today. It's bilateral, so exercise on two legs to then unilateral. So teaching yourself how to create some force and some quickness on two legs. And over time, as you become proficient, then you go to a single leg. I think this is just like everything else. We always pick the hardest exercise, and we think the hardest exercise is going to make us the best. When in reality, when it comes to creating power and explosiveness and speed, we actually want a nice, simple exercise that we can execute as quickly and as rapidly as possible. So that's why starting with squat jumps, doing a good job there. And if you need some type of assistance, if you need to use a TRX to learn the movement to become more explosive, like I actually recommend those things when it comes to force development here. And then taking that next step, squat jumps, bounce, perfect that, take some time, be patient, and then going to your single leg jumps from there.
Very nice. Sounds like we're on the same page. Everyone wants these complex exercises, but in reality, keep it simple, just principle all day long.
Yes. Yes, the basics always pay off most in the end. Not that it's not the most exciting, I think, from a training standpoint, but I think if you could truly enjoy the process and dive into that, I mean, the end result is that much greater.
Oh yeah.
So that's it. We just want to thank you guys for joining us today on this little mini webinar. Hope you can join us for the upcoming seminar. So workshop January 13th, 11:30 a.m. It will be about 90 minutes long, but cover things, I think, along the entire spectrum from pain to performance. So I know Anthony will talk about some of the injury side of things, assessments, evaluations, rehab, how do we get out of pain? And then from there, taking that next step, strength training, injury prevention, some running coaching principles as well. But Anthony, any thoughts on the workshop itself that you want to share with people?
Really come with questions. I hate just talking at people, so we're going to try to make this as interactive as possible. If you have specific questions, I'm sure we'll be more than happy to answer them on the spot. But if you want to reach out to us, Instagram, email, whatever way you want to, whatever's easiest for you, we'll get those questions answered. It will give us a way to kind of build the workshop around what you guys actually want to see instead of what we want to talk about. So that always helps us, or helps me at least. We're going to be, it's going to be 90 minutes of going from what we've talked about already. So should be a fun one.
And I'm looking forward to it. So you guys, if you guys want to go to the sign up is on my website, GarrettMcLaughlin.com, or if you want to quickly scan that barcode right there, that will send you directly there. Any questions, feel free to reach out. But thank you for joining us today. And for those who are able to watch us at a later time, and we look forward to seeing you at the upcoming workshop. But thanks, everyone.